notice on this. Okay, we're in Ephesians 4. That's the reason he didn't do any slides, too. As I said, this is one of my... Am I on? Yeah, I'm on. Okay. This is one of my favorite chapters, and it's the kind of chapter that's almost like a guidebook or an instruction book on how to do some things, which I find it helpful because I'm kind of stupid, and so I need lists of things. He starts with a premise statement or a basic idea. He says, as a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. And he spends the entire chapter describing what a worthy life would be like. And he kind of does it in different kinds of chunks. But this kind of flies in the face of what... Well, I guess I was taught this as a child, but it was more like earning my salvation. And then we have people who go the other way. You know, there's absolutely nothing you can do, and they reach the point where they say, therefore, you should not even try to do anything. They just, I'm just so sinful. I'm just going to rock in the arms of the grace of Jesus, and that's going to be it. Not going to try to be good. Not going to try to do anything. But he tells us here to live a life worthy of the calling that we've received. And he doesn't tell us why, but I can't imagine not trying to do that. And he starts out by saying, be completely humble, which is my greatest sin. I can't do that, apparently. But be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. So that gets a big chunk of it right there. And then he continues, I'm going to have to clear my throat several times, it seems like. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. This is, I think, related to being humble and gentle and patient and bearing with one another in love. Part of that is to make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There's one body, one Spirit. There's one body, one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all, through all, and in all. And then he kind of goes off into Bill, you might want to comment on this. I don't have a lot to say about it, but he says, but to each of us grace has been given as Christ apportioned it. This is why it says, when he ascended on high, he took many captives and gave gifts to his people. And then he goes into some kind of a Jewish explanation of what does it mean when he ascended and descended and everything. He's quoting from the Psalms. I forget which one it is. It's down at the bottom of this, but he's quoting a psalm. Bill, do you have any comments, or anybody else have any comments on that odd piece? Sure, go ahead. Yeah, he had to make it hard, didn't he? Completely. That's true. Yeah, those may be two of the hardest things to do. That may be the reason he mentioned them first. I've joked and said humility is the thing you lose when you think you finally got it. Humility is a hard one to do because if you strive to achieve it, you are automatically precluded from achieving it. The harder you try to get it, the less you're likely to be able to achieve it. It's one of those things that you just kind of have to let happen, but you can intentionally try to be gentle. And I'm not even sure exactly what he means by that. Gentle can mean a lot of things.
When he talks about, the first commandment is love the Lord thy God with all thy heart. Mm-hmm. And the second is love thy fellow.
To love your neighbor as yourself. But I know people who are loving but are not gentle. But some people just, their personality is not one of gentleness. And they may be striving for whatever measure of gentleness they can achieve, but then there are other people who are just the soul of gentleness. And that one I have to work on. I gave up trying to do the humility thing because, like I say, the harder I try, the more it eludes me. Hopefully, that will happen someday through some miraculous event. But gentleness is something I have to think about. And being me, yes?
This kind of goes back to some other things you said in other places too, like we need to look after other people's responsibly looking after other folks. We have a family responsibility for each other, and not being in anybody else's business, but that we're there for their welfare to make sure that they do well and that they are okay and they're cared for.
Yeah, and this has become in recent years a really important thing to me, that looking after family, which includes both your immediate family and your church family.
That's the basic work of elders.
Yeah.
They're not the board of directors of the church.
Yes.
They are the shepherds that go out and see about the sheep.
And take care of it. And they may direct one or more of us to do a function of caring for the sheep, but I guess I view the elders as being the ones who try to identify the needs, I guess, or to be aware of them.
They're to set an example for others to follow.
But the longer I live, the more important I think it is to make sure that nobody in the family suffers unnecessarily in whatever way. I mean, I do that with my family, my own children. I don't want them to suffer financially or emotionally or from a health standpoint or anything like that. You know, it'd be pretty cold if our daughter needed to go into the hospital and get an operation and I had the money to pay for it and she didn't, and I said, well, too bad for you, you know. Yeah, but that won't pay for all of it, you know. And I'm thinking that we need to extend that feeling toward the family at the church. If possible, no one in the church should go without necessities.
That's why I brought that up, because
Not to say here how we view, but in some areas in churches I've seen and experienced where family members don't have that gentleness or that patience or that endurance or tolerance for one another.
one of the places that I served one time, we had members that lived 30 miles away, as far away as 30 miles from the church building, and others that lived 25 miles in the other direction. These people lived 50 miles apart.
Yeah.
And so it was hard for them to have any kind of resource of being together.
Except rather at meetings.
So there are times that you have family gatherings in order to bring those resources together.
Yeah.
And then there are times in which you take a group and go there in order to let them know how important that they really are.
Yeah.
And that they're not just out on the periphery and I live way out here. In fact, most of the people in one congregation where I live, most of them live between 12 and 15 miles away from where the church building was.
Wow. Okay. That's why. Well, we used to go to West End and we drove 22 miles, you know, to get to church. That was a choice. Yes, that was a choice.
So that was the only congregation that was in the county.
Well, we need to be together, and look. And I guess I grew up in the church, but that really wasn't part of the style of the time. We saw each other at church, but that was it. There was no real connection or interaction, and I'm actually going to talk about that subject later on this summer, sometime in July, I think, when we've got several of the guys doing Wednesday night things. I'm actually going to talk about that subject in some more detail for my subject item. So we need to be humble, gentle, patient. Gentle and patient are two different things. Bearing with one another, I'm guessing that is the word for long-suffering, because patient and long-suffering are two different words. Patient has to do with giving a person time to do better. That's patient. Allowing a person time to do better. Long-suffering is putting up with something that you don't really ever expect for it to be better. That's two different things altogether. Long-suffering is the hard one. Patience is hard. Long-suffering is extremely hard because you're allowing this person to continue not to improve without rejecting them. They may not be able to improve ever. So there is a big difference between being patient and being long-suffering. And they're both hard. We need to be unified, and of course he talks in verse 7 about how each one of us is given grace as Christ apportioned it. And of course I think he's actually probably referring in general to both gifts that we have to use in the church, as well as some people, this is going to sound wrong. Some people need more grace than others. That's not the correct way to say it. But some people have difficulties in their life that I don't have, let's say, that they have to bear up under. And God may need to fill them with more grace in some cases. And we should be willing to grant them that same grace. Some people just can't, be a superstar Christian. They fight constantly. Well, for example, a person who has addiction difficulties, they keep falling and falling and falling. We keep going, why don't you do any better,
One time I told a person that this particular woman needed more attention than you do or than some others. I said, if we don't give her attention, she's liable to just quit coming.
So she needed more grace, essentially.
Yeah, she needed that.
Yeah.
She needed that contact. This was about the only contact that she had. And there's just some people that need to be petty.
Yes, some people, that's a good way to say it. Some people need to be petted a little bit.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't object to that. I mean, if that's what they need, we need to do that. Did what? Yeah. And, obviously there are extreme cases where the person becomes, they just use the situation, but we should look, again, I look at my children differently than I do other people's children. And I look at my children differently from each of them. My daughter requires one kind of attention, my son requires a different kind of attention. And we need to be willing to do that to the family here. If there are certain people who need to be constantly encouraged to do whatever they need to do or to just be here, we should try to do that if we can. Now, there will also be people who don't want you to, as you said, Bill, meddle in their lives, and they want you to leave them alone, and then they complain because you didn't help them. So, we have to, when we have needs, we need to also be willing to express those needs, because, I don't know about you, but I'm not a very good mind reader. I'm not, in fact, guys in general are not very good mind readers. Women think they are. But, they think they know what we're thinking. They don't have a clue any more than we have a clue what they're thinking. But they think they know what we're thinking.
This comes from observation of over 40 years.
Okay, all right, good.
I think the biggest problem that exists in this is the lack of understanding the difference between love and charity. And they are not the same.
They're not the same. Charity can be done without love.
People say, I don't want charity.
Yes.
But they need love.
Yes.
And they don't understand that what we're offering oftentimes is not charity. It's not that just here's $1 and we're going to take care of it that way.
Yeah.
But it's because we are concerned. And I don't think we have expressed ourselves well enough, either from the pulpit or in our Bible classes or in any of our actions, to show people that we really do care about them.
I think there are more non-financial needs than there are financial needs.
Probably.
We usually think of meeting needs or benevolence in terms of physical/financial needs, food, clothing, shelter, and things like that.
You look at the membership of this congregation and how many poor people do we really have?
We have a few.
Not many.
Not many.
It's way out of proportion to the needs of those individuals needing spiritual guidance and spiritual love and spiritual understanding.
But we also have people who have very good jobs or very good incomes,
Right.
who are in financial trouble
And still need that
and need
spiritual
guidance and help.
And help.
May need a little bit of financial help, but may need more guidance than anything else.
Well, those that are trained in household finances can share that with others, and that's part of what all this was. When we go back and look at the first church that was recorded, shared with us in Acts the 2nd chapter, these people shared everything that they had. I'm not saying that you have to give away your bank account or anything like this, but the fact was their consideration and their love for each other and their understanding of the probability of Jesus coming again real quick.
Yeah, they were thinking next week.
Yeah, that they lived only on their current means.
Yeah, and it was pretty much a communal society. I don't want to say communist, but it was a communal society. Very different than what we're used to. Very different. But we need to be looking, for other people's emotional needs, physical needs, spiritual needs, whatever needs are out there. And we each have unique qualities or talents or characteristics or abilities that we may not think is all that valuable, but when you start looking for ways to use that skill, you'll be shocked at how valuable it can turn out to be. In fact, if you only help one person, you've done your job. You don't have to help everybody in the congregation necessarily. But if you stop, it would be a good thing to maybe sit down, if you've not done this before, and say, what am I good at? And actually make a list. What am I good at?
You probably need somebody else to tell you that.
Maybe.
Most people think they're good at something.
Well, you start out a list and you talk to your wife or a friend or something. You say, look at this list and see if you know of anything else I'm good at, or if I have mislabeled myself as good at something. I am good at, driving cars. No, you're not. You're a terrible driver. What am I hearing? Oh, 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 oh. Jim, your music is not one of your skills, buddy. You have many others, but that's not it. All right, go ahead, Bill.
Telling us what we can do and what we can't do. And yet this is the whole concept of what shepherding is about. The sheep don't know where to go unless the shepherd guides them where they're supposed to go.
This is one of those things that, people recognize your skills, unless you have a hidden skill that they don't know about. I happen to be very skilled at model railroading, which doesn't turn out to be all that useful as a spiritual gift, but nevertheless.
But it could also be a very high useful tool in gathering children together.
This is an example. One of my hobbies is model railroading. One of my hobbies is reloading and shooting. People go, how in the world could that be used for spiritual things? Okay, the model railroading, I could find other members that were interested in that sort of thing, and it would bring us together. We could throw something special for the kids, if I could ever get it to the point to where they could use it.
And the same thing is true with the shooting.
Same thing is true with shooting. I've taken people out in groups to shoot.
You're not talking about 50 or 60 people. You may be mentoring 3 or 4.
We did this with the Boy Scouts.
Yeah, not even that many.
Used to, when they would allow it.
Yeah.
And we used to do this at Tom Goodpasture's house. In fact, we had the youth from Highland View one time, some years ago, to go over to Tom Goodpasture's house. There must have been 50 of us. And we all shot for the whole afternoon. It's a great time. blast. So you may think that your skills are not that applicable, but what could sound less applicable than enjoying shooting, target shooting for spiritual things? Well, it gets people together, and they interact and associate, and you learn to understand people more. Charlestine Thrift several years ago said, she just called in, I forget if she just called into the front office or whatever, she said, I need my house pressure washed. I thought, oh gosh, I know who's going to do that. So I called Levi and I said, I need to get a couple of the teenagers who will come over and help me pressure wash Charlestine's house. Well, let's see, Gabby Morgan, Jenna Beckler, a couple of others that have slipped my mind, came. And I had never spent any time around these kids, ever. I learned their faces, I learned their names, I found out who their parents were, and found out that they were pretty good workers and everything. And I had been here since they were babies. Didn't even know them. And so I got to meet these people that I didn't know. So if it's nothing but getting out and working on somebody's yard for them, if you're good at that, if you're good at woodwork, if you can provide rides for people, I don't have any skills, but I got a car, and I haven't had a wreck in 2 or 3 weeks. Well, you can provide rides for people then.
That's that definition of humility, is that
You need me more than I need you.
That's right.
And then I try to supply that.
That's right. Okay. Do we want to talk any more about the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace? Since that's kind of the next thing down through there.
That's not talking about business meetings, is it?
No, it's not. So if we jump down to about, I guess, the verse 13, he says, so Christ, he's talking about the grace that's given to various people, and he's talking about more or less the gifts that they receive, which we've seen in, 1 Corinthians 13? No, 12. So he says, so Christ himself gave, does your version say some to be? Mine doesn't say that. I must have, what version am I looking at? Well, I'm looking at the NIV. I thought it said some to be apostles and some to be prophets. But it says, Christ gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors and teachers to equip his people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity, which he's just been talking about, in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God, and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. You remember in the previous chapter he said he was talking about being filled with the full measure or all the fullness of God, and so he's using a similar statement here that these people, I don't guess we have apostles today, might have prophets, don't know about that for sure, but we do have evangelists and pastors and teachers, pastors being the elders, or those who do elding or pastoring, to equip us for works of service, the good deeds that he talked about back in Ephesians 2:10 that were prepared for us to do, so that we may build up the body of Christ and achieve that unity that he's been talking about. So he's kind of tying a whole bunch of different things here together at one time. And it's interesting, I'm wondering, when you think about evangelists and teachers and things like that, you normally think about somebody teaching you about the Bible, right? That's what you would normally think of. They are teaching me theological information. But he says to equip, the purpose of those people is to equip his people for works of service. Well, now I can know the books of the Bible backwards and forwards and be able to recite the Beatitudes and name all the apostles. And you see, that's what I was taught as a kid. I could name all the apostles. I could recite the Beatitudes. I knew the books of the Bible forwards and backwards. I knew all these facts. But I'm not sure that's what he had in mind here. That doesn't equip you for works of service. That equips you for playing a game of trivia about the Bible, basically, is what that does. we are supposed to be taught how to do works of service. And so that goes back to what we've been already talking about. It's all wrapped up in works of service, living a life that is worthy of the calling by devoting ourselves to works of service. And that has nothing to do with earning your salvation. It's your response to the salvation that God has given you. You become an ambassador of Christ, essentially. He says that. Where does he say that, Bill? Something about ambassadors of Christ. I can't remember where it says it, but I know he says it. As my mother used to say, I know it's in there. It's wrong. I thought it was, but I wasn't sure. So we actually are the face of Christ to other people.
You made this mention a little while ago about people who think they can earn their salvation. The church, salvation, the relationship to God and all, is like a bank account. You can go into the bank and you say, I'd like to withdraw some money. But if you don't have an account there, you can't do that.
Unless you have a gun.
But you have to make a deposit before you can make a withdrawal.
Yeah.
And this is the way that the Christian life works, is that the account is set up for us in our name by Jesus Christ and what He's done. We have to deposit into it our good works. Those don't earn us anything. But in order to be able to receive what we need,
We have to put something into
then
it.
in order we can withdraw from that. And this is why your life and my life together are important, because I can draw from what you can provide, and you can draw from what I can provide.
Yeah, you can't just be a taker. You got to be a giver as well.
Well, in order to gain spiritual benefit.
Yeah. I mean, if you take and just take, you have no spiritual growth as a result of that. You got to give back to it
And that's
also.
all. I think that's all wrapped up in the verse that says, "For God gave His only begotten Son."
Mhm.
He didn't say He loaned Him to us. He said He gave Him.
Gave it. Okay. And he says, once we get to the point to where we are prepared for these works of service and do them, and we attain to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ, he says, then we will no longer be infants tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of Him. We will be the body of Him, parenthetically I said, who is the head, that is Christ. So Christ is the head, and we are the mature body of Christ. From Him, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. So there's the basic layout of what we need to be doing in just a few words. And I'm ashamed to say we don't read that very much and pay much attention to it. We're much more interested in the facts of the Bible. Again, back to some of the, I remember it was very, very important when I was a kid to my teachers that I know the books of the Bible. Didn't know anything in them, but I did know the names of the books of the Bible. Well, that's helpful, but that shouldn't be your major goal. Your major goal should be learning to be patient and gentle and kind and doing works of service and caring more about another person than you do yourself. Those kinds of things as we go through. So then, anybody want to say anything else about that? I'm about to jump to verse 17, which is subtitled Instructions for Christian Living.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I want to say something.
Something about your comment about learning the Scriptures.
Oh, I'm all for learning the facts, by the way. I'm all for that. That just shouldn't be the final thing.
The whole purpose in that is to teach children to, first of all, know God's Word, and secondly, to love God's Word, and to be able to use God's Word. If you talk to somebody about the book of
Haggai.
Yeah, the book of opinions. You know, what are they going to look for?
Yeah.
You know, and the whole point in that is those children, and I've taught these school children's classes for many years, and the thing about it is you get them to feel an enjoyment of this, not something that's just a rote situation that they have to do, but it's something they want to do.
Well, I agree with you, absolutely. But there is a difference between just knowing the story of Noah and knowing what that means to your life. Big difference. Now, people say, well, they're small children.
It means a whole lot of difference to a 5-year-old than it would.
Yeah, but there needs to be an application there. In fact, I was really good at Bible facts, but I didn't start really paying attention to them until I was in my mid-20s. I mean, I had been baptized, but I didn't really start paying true attention to what the Bible facts meant until I was in my 20s. Maybe even older than that. I guess I do it more and more as I live longer, so I'm not exactly sure when the date was, but I know I was not paying attention. I was even teaching classes. You know, I taught Revelation when I was 18 to an adult class. Now, you can guess how that went. It was very factual, at least based on the supposition that I was working from, which was totally wrong, by the way. But nevertheless, we need to work more. I would rather be ignorant of the Scriptures and apply them than to be knowledgeable of the Scriptures and not apply them. I would rather, somebody teach me that you should be this way, this way, this way, and this way, and I not be able to point to the Scripture. I would rather be that way than to be able to point to all the Scriptures that tell me, the kind of person I ought to be and not be that person. And I was kind of brought up in the world where I was taught, where to go to get the answer, but I wasn't taught to live the answer necessarily. I knew all the right answers, and most of them were factual answers rather than how to live my life. Yes, that's what that's called, I believe, hypocrites. Okay, so we don't want to be infants tossed back and forth. Now, this is an interesting thing. This is kind of similar to what Jesus said one time, and again, this was just thrown at me a few minutes ago, so I didn't do any research on it. But remember, Jesus said, be, what was it, wise as serpents and as, gentle as doves? Is that what he said? That means don't be stupid. But also don't be dangerous either, but don't be stupid. There are times that we will be so naive and stupid that there's just no other way to describe it. And he says, don't be infants here in verse 14. That, somebody can just come in with some new teaching and you just buy it hook, line, and sinker because they got a PhD, I'm sorry, PhDs get granted to people who stay a long time in college. If you stay long enough, I was in graduate school, I only got a master's degree, but there were people who stayed long enough to where after a while the university just gave them what's called a pity PhD. If you stay 10 years, you get a PhD whether you deserve it or not, you see. So just having a PhD doesn't make you right. In fact, what it does is it makes you very, very knowledgeable about a very, very, very narrow area. It's what a PhD does. My son has a PhD in microbiology, but his PhD is in an extremely narrow, small, little corner of microbiology. Now, he's pretty smart in microbiology in general, but that doesn't make him an absolute expert on all of biology. He can tell you everything there probably is to know about what he did his dissertation on. And I only have a master's degree, but I did a thesis, and I can tell you everything there is to know about how to measure argon-41 in an air-cooled reactor. Like that's helpful. Yeah, I can tell you everything there is to know about that because that's what I did my thesis on. But I'm generally knowledgeable about radiation protection, but I don't know all the answers to it. So just because a person has a PhD or is, skilled in speaking or whatever, or is even older, and in general, older people are more experienced and have better, thoughts than 20-somethings. Although 20-somethings can have good thoughts too. But just because they're that way, in fact, he's actually talking about people who are skilled in persuasion, basically. That they can sway you. Don't let that happen. Pay attention. Be like the, what was the group of people that searched the Scriptures? Was it Bereans? Okay. That stuff keeps coming back into my head, and as I get older, I'm forgetting a lot of it. But, they checked to see if what Paul and the others were saying made sense with the Scriptures that they already believed. And so if somebody comes in and starts throwing stuff at you, you don't just swallow it. If mama puts a bottle in baby's mouth, the baby doesn't say, "What's that?" They just start sucking, And it could be milk, it could be water, it could be orange juice, or it could be, hydrochloric acid. It could be anything. He wouldn't know until it was too late, probably. They trust. We need to be as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves. We need to no longer be infants tossed back and forth by every wind of teaching and stuff that just comes out of small directions. Now, that doesn't mean that you reject a person, and I think I mentioned this Sunday. You don't reject a person just because what they say just because of who they are, any more than you accept it just because of who they are. We tend to, for example, if the preacher is not one of us, we won't pay any attention to what they say. Every now and then they say something good, Tyra likes to watch Charles Stanley on Sunday morning. I would say 90% of everything he says is great. Great. Occasionally he kind of gets off in a weird direction, but 90% of everything he says is great. He's a good teacher. T.D. Jakes, I don't know if you know him or not, but I've learned a lot from that guy. I haven't watched him in several years, but he can throw out some pretty good stuff every now and then. So again, truth is truth wherever you hear it, but you need to be able to discern what is truth and not just swallow it either because the person is imminent or reject it just because the person is not of your particular philosophy or whatever. So we need to be smart, not stupid. So the body grows and builds itself up in love and we're going right back to it again, as each part does its work. Being a Christian is work. Again, it doesn't earn you your salvation, but it's work. We have to do our part. This ear didn't earn its position on my head, and neither did this ear. They just came as a natural part of my body. And I accept them. I like them. But if one ear stops working, it's not useful to me anymore, is it? It's useless. Or if if my leg goes dead, I can't use that. Guys, I used to do I guess we called it the children's worship thing on Sunday morning. I was involved in that when we were in Charlotte, and then over at West End, Tom Rucker and I put together a program called Christians Under Construction, using a construction theme of all the equipment and everything associated with that, but basically a children's church. And I don't think I have the demeanor for it anymore, but I really enjoyed doing it when we did it. I did puppets and led singing and told stories and did all kinds of fun stuff. I did learn in that that we were talking about children earlier and teaching them the stories and everything. I did learn that even as young as 5 or 6, they have a remarkable grasp and ability to understand what we would consider advanced principles. agonized over how to handle the whole process of Easter with the kids. They were like from 5 to about 4th or 5th grade. So that would put them about, what, maybe 10 or 11, from about 5 years old to about 10 or 11. And we had a series of videotapes that did the week of Christ's life before, or actually a little longer than that. But basically, we were showing videotapes leading up to the crucifixion and the resurrection. And the difficulty was, do you show them the crucifixion? Because this one was pretty graphic, and it was really well done. I don't remember who did it. And we kind of talked around and said, okay, we're gonna try it and see what happens. And these 5-year-olds watched this, and like I said, it's pretty graphic. And then we discussed what this meant for them and everything, and they got into it big time. I mean, I thought they would, their parents would come back and say they had nightmares and things like that. Not a one of them. They got it really well and fast. So I was kind of sure, are you guys done? You're done? We're done. With everything? Oh, it's past 7:30. Okay, we got down to verse 17, Curtis. Instructions for Christian living. Okay. So you get to do all the, living your life differently from the Gentile stuff.
Oh, okay.
We got all the completely humble and gentle and.
Oh, you took care of all that.
We got all the way down to verse 17. What are you laughing at, Don? We're done with that. Don't ever have to look at that again, ever again. Okay, guys, it's past 7:30. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was so late. Yeah, y'all can come in. No, church is over. So we got.